Tapinda pano pakanoiwa nyai broadcast deni sangwa dzisipiwe kachidza mapfumo. Aiwa pindai wana tarisai, wana kromwero, wana maguma, pindai daidzai wamwe, wana shumba, wana nhari, wana mhofu dzemukono, wana nzou, wese uyai mwanyepo kuti kwaisangwadzi wapinda pakanoiwa nyai. Tatanda nyasi musuwo mugovera uno tine murendo wedu Roseline Zigomo gweta redu. Aiwa daidzai vanhu vese kwakatsukunya tiri kukudaidzai vanhu matoko ese uyai nyasi pano toda kutaura nyasi toda bakuti anotsi takazvinzwa baibvai mandouya kubvira kwanyadire kwakatsukunya kumanhemba kumutuhwa kwanyamakope kwanzi kumauyu munokuziva kumauyu kumasunzwa kwese pamatownship payo bhure kusvika kuolsozi kwese kwaroti kwakawere kwako kusvika tasvika kususwe nyamukoho kusvika tabhura kusvika kubhodha wese hama dzedu mbanhu wokwedu mbokwedu kwamutoko uyai pachirongwa chedu chatinota musi wemugovera wega nemusi wesvondo tosangana pano pakanoiwa nyai broadcast nenisangwa dzisipiwe kachidza mapfumo tichitaura hedu tichitandara tiri pano tichitaura tichidaidza vanasahwira wedu ava wana Roseline Zigomo vachiokotinyepa tichifunda zvinhu zvakawanda zvatinenge tichiite zvinenge zvichiitika zvatisingaziviba. Vamwe vazhinji vanenge vachiuya pakanoi vanobva kwamutoko, vamwe vacho ndanasahwira wedu vanouya pano toti uyai sangwadzi ari kukudaidzai muye kwete kotinyepa tifunde. Aiwa tiri kuzvitenda tiri kuona vanhu vari kupinda imimwe mobva maita like muchiita share pafacebook kuti wamuwani wete wazozvionawo. Handiti ndauya pekare naRoseline Zigomo makandinyepa vanhu mukati aiwa tadodzwa mushaba isu tagutsikana bata tanzwa zvakanaka zvaatinyepa mudaidze futi atinyepe zvimwe. Akakutaurirai nemadivorce last time she came here akatinyepa nekuti madivorce anofamba sei nekuti zvacho kana zvanetsa munozvifambisa sei, kana maenda kumagweta munotandira papi mogumira papi. Asi vanhu makafara mukati chirongwa chichiribe kunyatsa kuti tinoda but amudaidzei pekare atinyepe zvimwe. Kunondamudaidza ndati Roseline muzukuru uya uitei umorodza wani pinda waite ukwaidze vanhu vari kutiteera tozoti topinda mudariro pinda Roseline wanyepe ageni kuti ndiwe ani handiwe wakatinyepa kuti uri mai mhofu mai museyamwa mai mhofu wotitaurira kuti unosenza kupi unoita nezvechi pinda mudariro.
Manhero akanaka ndisipiwe nevese vari kunditeerera. Ndinotenda zvikuru kuti mandidzosera paprogram yenyu kuti nditaure nevanhu. Indeed, I'm a lawyer practicing in Harare, Zimbabwe. Ini ndiri a partner in a law firm, and I come from Chivu. My father ndiyera mhofu, ini ndakati ndinoyera Mwari musika vanhu, iye akasika mhuka dzese
mhofu dzacho dzese handisi
mhofu dzacho dzese
aiwa
I'm very glad to be
tazvinzwa.
here.
Aiwa tinotenda waita wadzoka pekare kotinyepa sekutaura kwandamboita nyasi Rose ari kuuya kotitaurira about something different, ari kuzotitaurira about estate planning. Takambodaidza mumwe gweta tichiri kutotanda iyo kanoiwa nyaya ichiri kutanda akatitaurira ainzi Precious Chisakwa akatitaurira zvakanaka nenyaya dzemamarriages nemawiro. Takafunda zvakawanda and tinozvitenda zvinondati aiwa ngatidaidze mumwe gweta futi atitauriro nezve estate planning kuti kana mawiro aitiwa ari important kana munhu akushayika afa zviyezvi kumhuri neavo vachasara. Asi pane zvimwe zvinhu zvatinenge tida kuti kubva tazozivisisa kuti kana munhu afa zviyezvi pane macosts anoita go with that and how does that look like and what can we do kuti chite tisazoguma tasangana nemabhiri akawanda kuti tipedzise estate yemunhu, kukombera estate yemunhu anenge ashayikazve. Chii chinofanira kuita? Kuno iye ari kuuya achitinyepa achitikotora kuti ayo mukadai munofanira mudai so kuti zvirege kuzonyanya kudhura. Asi ndisati ndadzoka kuna Rose, ndoda kumbokupaiwo news. Tinoda kumboita kanews handiti tinomboti sometimes kana tanzwa zvinenge zvichiitika kwamutoko toite todaidzawo ripota wedu wepakanoiwa nyaya anonzi Bruce otiitira news. Saka regai ndikuitire just 1 minute yenews dzakaitika kwamutoko masvondo mairi apera.
Tinoganudzai pakanoiwa nyaya broadcast navasangwadzisipiwe nyasi nyari mudaliro yenyaya kuburika papepanhau repadandemutande renews.zimbabwe.com apo ragobuditsa kuti wamunangagwa wakareketa masoko okuti vanhu vagere mumaruwa vachabisiwa ba munzvimbo dzavagere kuti kuitiwe zvokuchera-chera. Wakureketa izvi wari pamanyaradzo aparadza ezimhondi akaitiwa pachikoro chopuraimari yopachidodo kuzumba. Kwai izvozvi zvagoreitikazvi zvisvinuba wamunangagwa vagotoreketa kuti vanhu vanoda kuuya kochera-chera vanofanira kuti varemekedze mutemo wenyika pamodzi nozvido zvevagari vomunzvimbo dzavanenge vanoda kucheradzo. Wati vagari vomunzvimbo dzavanenge vanoda kucheradzo vanosimba rokuti kana vakaramba kuti vari kuda ba kuti kuchewe-chewe munzvimbo dzavagere kunocheriwa ba. Izvi heno kuti chokwadi chere, asi wamunangagwa vagoreketa vakati wakatoreketa nogurukota rinoringana zvokuparadziwa kwemasimba kumadunhu rokumashi-east kweduno Apolonia Munzverengi wakamunyepa kuti agomangara kuna makambani nevanhu vese vanenge vanoda kuita zvisiri izvo zvinokudiwa nevagari vomunzvimbo dzavanenge vagere. Ticharamba hedu tichiringa kuti zvinenge zvichipera sei. Tiri papo zvedu tinokutendai. Ndini wenyu mhandiwewo nhau.
Okay, mazvinzwawo nyaya yedombodzipa inyaya iri kunetsa vanhu vese vekwamutoko. Tese tikundotatatai takateerera takaisa nzeve pasi kuti tinzwa kuti zvichazoitiwa seiko. Nyika yaparara kuno uku, vanhu vagari vekwamutoko vari kuzvifarira vanhu vese vari kundotsusumwa vachipopota vachiti nai mitapadziwa nzvimbo ino. Vanhu vese tiri kundoteerera kuti zvichafamba zvakasvika papi. Saka patinenge taona kanyuzi kanenge kanenge kaita karehwawo mudandemutandemu tokunyepaiwo imimi kuti vanhu vazive kuti zviri kusvika papi nenyaya yedombodzvipa. Zvakanaka. Chipinda Rose muzukuru, chipinda mudariro uchititaurira nenyaya yawayo kotifundisa kutidzidzisa kuti estate planning inomboreweiko. Saka uri kuda kutinyepa kuti tigozoita sei kuti toziva kuti kana tichinyora mawiro aya bepa riya rekugumisira mhuri inozosara ichiita kunosara estate yemunhu inozoparadzwa sei nezvinenge zvazvinoreva. Chipinda mudariro, iwewe ndiwe unozviziva, tinyepe.
Thank you, Auntie Spiwe. Zvandiri kutaura nhasi tinoiti estate planning, which is a complicated, it almost seems complicated subject, but haisi. It's really organizing and managing nhaka yemufi, or rather nhaka ichapiwa ma-beneficiaries emufi. So zvinenge zvichiitika, which I think a lot of people don't know and don't understand, is that munhu wese anofa in any country, it's not just Zimbabwe, pane anonzi ma-estate costs, ma-taxes that the government will levy on that person who would have been alive. So it's almost like that saying yekuti there's only one thing that is sure in life, and that is death and taxes, it's actually correct. In that sense yekuti, when an individual dies, the last thing that is going to be levied from them will be a government tax. So what happens is that the government looks at the properties that that person would have owned when they were alive. Saka panoteitwa a listing down of the assets that would have been in that person's name. Those assets will include zimba, so what we call immovable property, land and buildings. It will also include movable properties, which would include motikari, maybe equipment yekubasa. It could be shops that the person owned, anima fixtures and fittings, shelves ayaya, ma fridge, ma stove, and then my household goods and effects, my contents emumba, furniture, my carpets, iwo my deep freeze, and so on and so forth. Mbeda, including even my bank accounts, ne mari dzinenge dziri muma bank accounts iwayo, ne ma shares. Let's say maybe munhu anga ane company and I hold my shares, my percentage ownership in that company, then those shares must also be listed. So the list goes on to what is called an inventory, a preliminary inventory at the very beginning when the estate is registered kwa master, because the master needs to make an assessment kuti how much is this individual worth in terms of the property and the assets that they owned at the time of their death. So every single thing that would have been in their name would be listed on that inventory, and the approximate values of those assets. The reason why the approximate values are needed is because at the end of the day, pachaitwa levied a tax, and that tax will be on the gross value of the property or those assets. So what people don't realize is that the government is entitled to tax those assets, those properties, that estate, even though the person has died. That is a law in every country. And as long as a property is in that person's name, the government is entitled to receive a percentage. In Zimbabwe, a person who dies owning properties worth, I believe the statutory value is 10,000 US dollars. That minimum value means that estate yoyo yakono register kwa master, which means kuti government is expecting a percentage of that value. So if that person had a number of properties, those are listed and the values are listed as well. The total balance, before taakutaura kuti panga pane mortgage here, panga pane mari dzinodiwa nevamwe waakabhorowa kuti atenge chinhu ichocho, before taakutombotaura nyaya yemacreditors, zvinonzi tiri kuda the gross value. Then wotora percentage, and that percentage is called the master's fee, and it is 4%. Anditika saka tozvinyora pasi, master's fee ichatorwa pa gross value ye estate, which will be automatically 4%. Then zvonzi maenda kwa master kuno appointa an executor. Executor uyu ari kunzi ngaamire mushoes memufi and be the person acha-administrator and manage kuti properties dzese dzichaenda kupi dzichapiwa ani, mabills achabhadharwa nani emufi. Iyeye munhu iyeye anonzi an executor kana ari munhu murume, kana kuti an executrix kana ari mukadzi. And those names are the same whether the person leaves a will or doesn't leave a will. That executor, anditi, iye achanzi iwewe taakukupa authority, let's call it authority by the government, in the form of letters of administration that then says, okay, you are the one who, by the virtue of these letters of administration, are going to go and act for us, the government, in winding down the estate of this dead person, making sure kuti tax dzedu dzinouya kwatiri, and vamwe vese vanonzi vari kuda mari dzavo from mufi uyu vanobhadharwa, zvinhu zvoitwa zviri orderly. And then balance yacho, the net balance, ndo inozopiwa vadyi venhaka, the beneficiaries. So that is regardless of whether the person left a will or didn't leave a will. So whether it's a testate or an intestate succession, an executor must be appointed. That executor, if they are appointed as a person who is not a what shall we call it, a professional, maybe it's a wife of the deceased, maybe it's the husband of the deceased, maybe it's the first-born child of the deceased, or the brother or the sister of the deceased, or even the mother or the father of the deceased. They're not considered working in their professional capacities. So in that respect, they're not really entitled to charge a fee, because vari kungobatsirawo hama yavo yafa. But the master, saka pachonoitwa, there will be a meeting inotodaidzwa kwamaster after the estate is registered, where the master will put an advert mu government gazette inenge ine date re-edict meeting iyoyo. Then my relatives emufi are told kuti musi wakati mozouya kuno ku office of the master, totaura tese nema relatives acho kuti who is the best person to stand in that position as an executor. Kana pane will, it's an easy decision because most wills will actually state kuti ndiri kuda uyu kuti aite executor wangu. Saka meeting iyoyo often haitombozoitwa hayo unless people don't know that there's a will, and then at the meeting somebody says, oh no, there's a will, and then the master may say, can I have a copy of that will? Or the master will say, yeah, tinotoziva kuti there's a will, takatopiwa mu negirikin mafiles edu, saka ndo will yacho iyi munhu aappointwa muwill umu ndinhingi as the executor, saka iwewe ndo waakutopiwa that job. But anozotopiwa futi anonzi my letters of administration. But where there is no will, if it's an interstate succession, that meeting must happen for the relatives to agree who is going to stand as an executor. Now, we all come from different families, and a lot happens in those families. So one of the things that may happen in a family is that there might be opposition to a family member being appointed as an executor. It could be, yes, the spouse, but maybe there are stepchildren involved. Maybe they are brothers or sisters of the deceased husband who may not necessarily get on with the spouse. And a lot of things can happen, and they may come in and they say, no, we don't want We don't want so
Why
and so
would
to be appointed.
why would the reason be some of the reasons inoita come up kuti vanhu vaite varambe kuti hatisi kuda kuti uyu ndiye aite, hatisi kuda kuti mukadzi wacho aite, hatisi kuda kuti mwana wacho aite? What are some of the reasons? Because I would think kuti hapana the person is not going to change the outcome yekuti nhaka ichaparadzwa sei. Saka chinopa kuti vanhu vadaro usually chii?
And Mato, you've actually hinted at the reason. It's ignorance. A lot of people don't understand, Kuti. It doesn't matter who is appointed the executor, because the process of appointing my beneficiaries is actually has already been done by the law. In other words, apana chicha chinja. Either there is a will in which the person has already stated, Kuti, Ningina Ningi are the people who are going to be my beneficiaries and heirs. Or, ana will, but government yatotaura kudara in terms of the law. Kuti muna anoshaya, asina will. Property yake inofanwa kwenda kuna nani. Saka because it's already statutorily promulgated, even if the executor might have ulterior motives or hidden agendas, they are not going to be able to give somebody who's not entitled to inherit that property, because whatever they're going to do is going to be scrutinized by the master, and the master will say, no, in terms of what law have you tried to give this person this? We are not going to approve that. So oftentimes it is ignorance. Oftentimes it is hidden resentments and family squabbles that will be going on underneath the surface. Maybe somebody doesn't like this person, believes that they are not fair or what have you. But often what people don't realize is that mukangouya muri disunited or ununited ku that edict meeting, the master then just says, avatombotori a vote. I mean, I've been in edict meetings where the relatives maybe of the deceased don't want the surviving spouse to be the executor, and they come in their numbers hoping kuti pachaitwa a roll call zvonzi, okay, how many people are saying no, how many people are saying yes? The master doesn't do that. They just simply say, if one person disagrees, then patoita a disagreement isusu as the master's office to appoint what we call a neutral executor, a neutral person. So the master has the right, the authority to appoint what they call a neutral person, and a neutral person simply just means that there has been no agreement by the family on the person who will be the executor. Okay, so that neutral person is not going to be, most oftentimes is not going to be a family member. It's going to be a professional person, either a lawyer, an accountant, a deceased estate company. Panama companies akuita the process of winding up my estates, my deceased estate companies. So the master has a list of all these possible people that could be executors. They've got a list of all the law firms and so on. So vanongoi to pick a name from the hat. Wotongoti, that's the person who's going to manage the estate. Now, when it's a professional, that person is entitled, for doing their job, 5% of the gross value of the estate. Sakatapai, tapa 9%. Sakataisa pa apapa, executor's fee, yapa 5%, total tapa 9%.
Master's fee 4%, this one is 5%, so it's 9%.
Yes. Yeah, tapa 9%. Icha visqua from the assets. So what then happens is that that executor is now in charge to make sure kuti these monies, because they will be calculated, and a cash sum will be put against those percentages. Anditika. So let's say the estate is worth 400,000 US dollars. If you take 9% of that, just a rough calculation for the purposes of the listeners, 9% would be 36,000. So that
Which you're supposed to
36,000,
pay out, right? Which you're supposed to pay out
yes,
to the masters and also to the.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So what the master is expecting is that that money is going to come to the master's office in cash, as in US dollars. If the estate is not selling any property, they will allow it to be paid in RTGS at the official bank rate, which would be 1:100. Okay, 1
Run that by me
97.
again. If they are not selling, you said
If
if
so,
they are not.
if so, if the estate is not bankrupt, or maybe a better word would be to say, if there's some cash in the estate, there is no need to actually sell a piece of property, or
Okay.
an item, an asset, to raise that money.
So it's possible kuti kana pasina
Yes,
mari pane maproperties asara, whether they are 3 million or they are 400,000, half a million, you can sell some of those to so that you can get money to pay
yes.
the master's fee and
The,
also okay, I see.
yeah, that is. So those fees are called the estate costs. So those estate costs now are what we are seeking to avoid when we are
Yes.
talking about estate planning. Okay. So in order to raise that money, that 36,000 coming out of that $400,000 bill, somebody has to say, okay, my relatives, my beneficiaries rather, the people that stand to inherit, which if it's a married person, it's going to be their spouse and their children. They're going to look to the spouse and the children and say, do we have this money? So 36,000 divided by, multiplied by the bank rate.
Okay.
Let's take the bank rate at 97. That brings the estate cost to 3,492,000 Zim dollars. So they'll say to the relatives, to the beneficiaries, panere ane 3.4 million RTGS kuti tibhadhare these estate costs. Then the relatives will look amongst themselves and see, maybe. So now they're having to what? They're having to dig into their own pockets to come up with that money and pay the government and the executor. Okay. But if nobody has that money, because who has
I was
$36,000?
going to say, in most cases, probably not. There's nobody with that kind of money so that this thing can move. Then what happens now?
Yes. So now the executor, it's the job of the executor to say, okay, so now let's see what makes up this 400,000. Or pane stand iri kuningi, it's worth so much. Pane imba iri paningi, it's worth so much. Pane motikari, it's worth so much. Ngatichitengesa each kuti tiwane this 36,000. Kana takutengesa zvinhu manje, people are selling them, obviously, particularly if it's land and buildings, they're selling them in US dollars. So master anoti aiwa isusu tiri kuda chi, our 36,000 iri in US dollars, atisi kuda iri in RTGS. Maybe you can sell a car in RTGS, but I don't think you're going to get a car worth 3.4 RTGS. Most likely it's going to be sold in US dollars if it's a car of real value. So that money now comes from selling items in the estate in order to make up that bill, that tax. Okay. So what has happened now is that the person who died thinking, I've left all this stuff to children. I worked hard for this stuff to be given to my children intact. Obviously, if they were alive, they would be quite in shock and they would be like, no, but I don't want that. I don't want you to sell things for my beneficiaries to inherit. I want them to get everything intact because I worked for this. And that is where estate planning comes in. And before I now go into what is estate planning, I also want to alert the viewers and the listeners to another tax that will be payable, which is estate duty. Because if the person had more than one property, the government will levy a certain percentage in estate duty over that property. So the government is entitled to, I think it's 5%. Also gross value of that property. Okay, sakatapai tagatiripa 4 plus 5 is 9 plus 5 equals 15. It's my maths is not that good. 14.
14%.
Tapa 14% and ditika. So if the person who died maybe owned a bottle store or a business in his personal name, he was a sole trader and ditika. Saka angane his butchery called Zigomo Enterprises. Every day money is coming in to the business, and they're collecting these monies from the sale of meat and other products. They're banking that money or putting it, stashing it under the bed. That cash, just because the person has died, the business doesn't stop running. But because he's a sole trader, the executor anobvumidzwa kuti say kuenda manje ku business ikoko ono collector ma daily takings iwayo, and he's entitled to a commission on collecting those daily takings. Kana munhu angane ma shops that he rented out and he got rent from those shops, the executor is entitled to go and collect the rentals and say ininda collect a rental ndakupiwo an agency fee. And those agency fees can go up to, I think they were then decreased, but they went up to as much as 18% as of 2017, 18%. So every day, kanapane a taking from that business where the deceased was a sole trader. Maybe that business is bringing in $1,000 every day, working 6 days a week. Executor arikunzi unobvumidzwa kutora a commission which is up to 18%.
But then does he actually go there to physically collect the money?
Yes,
or...
some executors do, yeah. And that's the interpretation of the statute, because some people will say so it now depends on how professionally the business was being run. If it's if it's like it's a real mom and pop business where the deceased person was the one who was responsible for taking in the money himself, then the executor will have to step into his shoes and do that. But if it was more professionally run and they were, managers that were doing all of that, sure, then it could be argued, no, the executor guy is not collecting these things. Or maybe the deceased person had an estate agent who was responsible for collecting those rentals. You could argue, no, the executor is not entitled to such a commission because they're not doing that job. In which case, I think they're still, though, entitled to a certain percentage, but it might not be 18% or 10%. But the master is also entitled to a percentage of those daily takings. And remember that these takings are at iskuti tambotanga tabhadhara my employees, tambotanga tabhadhara stock, aewa, tiri kungoti chete, whatever is coming in, that must be taxed. inenge yasara yacho ndo inozoita seinozobhadhara my employees
Yeah.
and other creditors. So you can see already that for a person who steps into the shoes of an executor, it's a bit of money. And for the government, for the master, it's also a bit of money. It's a revenue um, exercise. It's a revenue making exercise. So by the time that you get to the distribution of assets to the beneficiaries, a lot of money has actually been taken out of that estate. And if the estate takes a long time to wind up, it means that all those months that the business is carrying on whilst the estate is being wound up, and those monies are coming into the estate and being taxed and taxed and taxed, by the time you're through, a lot of I would say that a lot of beneficiaries won't be very happy at the end of the day, and you'll find there are lots of squabbles where a deceased person dies and he owned a lot of properties. You will find a lot of fights that will happen, and some will even take the executor to court. Some will take their other beneficiaries to court. Some will take the master to court. Kana matombopinda court, it means kuti that time period of winding up the estate has been lengthened, which means if there is a business, the people that are really making money from that business will be the government and the executor. That's something that people just don't understand. So
and some of these estates not going to stretch up to how many
oh
years?
yes, oh yeah, yes. I don't know, Kutsi, whether some of your viewers might remember high school and literature. There was a book yakanyorwa na Charles Dickens called Bleak House, and it's really the central story is around a deceased estate and relatives fighting over the deceased estate. And at the end of this very, very thick book and this long and very complicated story, it just turns out that there is no money in the estate, and the only people that made any money from the estate were the lawyers. So
that's interesting,
and that's the
coming
truth.
from a lawyer. It's interesting,
Yeah.
you telling us as a lawyer that if some of these things kana tisingazvizive soka tinenge tichingowanhu vachingomarana vachingomarana, and in the process, who is really benefiting
It's the lawyers.
it's the lawyers. It's the,
because they
it's
must
the
be
estate
paid.
which is, they have
Yeah.
to be paid, and all
They
people
have to be
involved.
paid.
That's interesting.
And the executor also must be paid, who may be a lawyer or who has had to hire lawyers in order to defend them. So fighting in deceased estates is really, I really want to urge your listeners, it's not your best plan of action. It's probably better to sit down and negotiate with my beneficiaries, more garapas, more the executor, because what you want to do is to preserve the estate. So
that there'll be something left,
so that there'll be something left, So you as a person, an individual who is thinking of what's going to happen to me when I die in terms of my property, you must have a serious decision-making process and coming to a place where you say, I don't want that. I don't want that. And so I'm going to manage that whole process. And that's what we call estate planning. Okay, it's managing.
Rose, I think the average person anongofunga kuti wataura kuti anenge ane maproperties pamwe ane mabusinesses ane mashares, and somebody looks at themselves and say, no, inini angu handina mashares, handina chichichi, ndingori inini, and saka why even bother learning zvinhu zvakadai kana kuenda kuita a will or whatever. Handina chandinacho, chandingori nacho ingori imba yangu yekwaifirizi chete. Obviously yakadaro, but I think that's the problem yatinayo is ordinary people. We just don't think these things, they matter and they will impact upenyu hwedu isusuka nekuestate yako iwewe, because hakuna munhu variko vanongotorwa ungofushirwa zvatopera zvakadaro. But munhu wese ari registered anenge kunyanya kana une kaproperty kana kane kapiece of land kawakatenga. I think zvauri kutitaura izvo zviri important kuti titeerere kuti the little that I have, ndofana kunzwa information kuziva kuti to know how can we circumvent some of these things.
How can we circumvent? How can we anticipate and prepare and plan and circumvent those issues? So every person who has anything to their name that is of value. So by this, I'm talking about if you've bought a stand or you're buying a stand, if you've got a house, if you've got a business, if you've got any company shares, if you've got a car or cars, whatever property that you have, begin to think of estate planning, because it's going to affect the people that you think will be able to inherit without any problems, but they're going to experience some issues. So the first thing, which you alluded to, Auntie Spiwe, is that issue, a will. A will, making a will, is one of the first parts of estate planning. Because in that will, you are putting in a document your wishes as to what you desire should happen to the things that you own. It's even putting in place, I've done wills for people where they're saying, I don't want these things to happen at my at my funeral. I want my funeral to be like this, and to actually specify how the funeral will be done.
But how do you know iwewe Rose Zigomo kuti Auntie Spiwe wafaenda kwamutoko wotonzwa kuti next week kuti vakafa vakanikirikira pakaita manikekeni masaramusi pawakafa, because vamwe vachiti ngaavigwe kuHarare, vamwe vachiti vakati vari kuda kucriminatwa zvikatoguma zvanetsa cremation yacho how do you know that? Because kana andauya kwauri ndichiita specify how I want my funeral to go, without expecting it to be overridden by vanhu vekumusha kwangu kumusha kuti traditionally tinoviga vanhu like this. How then do you know kana munhu auye straight kwauri achikutaurirai kuti
So when I do a will for a client, I will do it my former originals. So in the one inoenda kwa master, yotoregistrwa kwa master, so that if the estate is then registered, they can look it up in the wills register and pull it out. Then the one stays in the lawyer's office in a wills cabinet. Itone register yayo. The other two, in fact, I normally say to the client, keep one amongst your personal things and tell people that you've done a will, your close family. And then one give to either a close personal friend or a close relative that you trust, so that when you die, they say,
or the will, the whole complete will, or just that, will. But why would I want somebody to see my will before another person, second person to ever look at my will? I would have thought kuti if anything happens to me, my will iri kuZigomo and partners go there. But kuvapa will yacho chaiyo, how can you trust people that they won't divulge what's in the will?
Okay, I mean, it's up to you. If there are things that you really don't want people to know until you're dead, fair and fine, keep it close. But I think it's always better for people to know what it is that you are desiring. So, okay, maybe you may not give the will, the copy, to somebody that you trust, but you may be able to say to them, my lawyer has my will, and it states, it gives specific instructions on my burial. Saka ndiri kuda kuti kana ndafa and you hear about it, you immediately contact my lawyer, and my lawyer will know what to do. Okay. That is a very fair proposition. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, that is a very fair proposition, and you do see lawyers going to my funerals and actually, either reading out or basically talking to a relative and saying, okay, this is what this person had said concerning where they want to be buried, and therefore this is what is going to happen. Because you don't want a situation where people are going to court, and we have seen it happen, and arguing about where the person should be buried, those sort of things. So that's
right.
yeah. So that's part of your estate planning, that aspect of your burial, and then what happens to your property. The other part, and I think your viewers might have gone into some depth with the previous speaker on how to write a will and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go into that. What I just wanted to let the viewers know is that writing a will is part of estate planning. Yeah. The other part of estate planning is coming up with a vehicle. We're calling it a vehicle, Anditika, that will house your assets and keep them intact so that nothing and no one will be able to break them apart on your death through zvezvo ndakachitaura macosts aya ndakachitaura atinoti estate costs. Anditika. Now, what are those vehicles? There are two specific ones that I will highlight to the viewers. The first one is a company, and the second one is a trust. Both of them have their issues. The one I prefer is a trust, and I'll go into the reasons why. The formation of that vehicle, Anditi, is in law, we are calling it a person, a legal person. It's not a flesh and blood person, but it is a legal person in terms of the law. Why? Because it is allowed to do certain things as if it were a person. So it is allowed as a company or a trust to sue and be sued. It is allowed to buy property, to sell property. It is allowed to mortgage property. It is allowed to sell, rent out that property. It is allowed to make investments on the stock exchange, make investments in other investment areas. It is allowed to hire people, to fire people. It is allowed to do a number of things. And so it has that status of a person, but as a legal person. So that person never dies. That's the difference between a legal person and a natural person. A vehicle, which is either a trust or a company, never dies, but a natural person dies. And because a natural person dies, a natural person is liable to death taxes. But a legal person never dies, so it is never liable to death taxes. And so here we come into the what the viewers might have heard of as tax avoidance, which is distinctly different from tax evasion. Okay, so you set up a vehicle that is going to avoid certain taxes that you would be liable for on your death. But you are not evading tax, which is a criminal activity, by trying not to pay an obligation that is due from you. So when we are talking about tax evasion, we're talking about trying to evade income tax because you work for that money. My second books of account and so on. But tax evasion won't apply perma-death taxes if you enter into estate planning, because what you are doing there is you are saying, in the event of my death, there will be taxes that will be due. But I haven't yet died. But now I'm putting in place a vehicle that will avoid those taxes. Okay, and that vehicle.
Are we talking? Are we making like my master's fee, nema estate duty? Are those the ones you are?
Yes.
Represented by that person. We are talking that person who is not like a live person, but the trust.
Yeah, the trust or the company. So what the government is saying basically is that on Rose Zigomo's death, if she had a vehicle which now owns the properties that were in her name on her death. So Rose Zigomo, when she was alive in 1992, she set up a trust and she put all her properties into that trust so that when she dies 30, 40, 50 years from 1990, she has no property in her name, we cannot go and tax the trust that she set up, because that trust does not die. But
I
if
like
Rose
that.
Zigomo,
Dies,
but if Rose
then we're going
Zigomo
to
had,
tax it.
yes, we're going to tax, because we see kuti deeds office anima properties akati, she's got all these properties in her name, therefore they are due to be taxed, what is called death taxes.
Saka manje kana une trust, how then do you wind up, how do we then wind
Yes.
up estate yako?
You don't. This is the beauty of it. You don't. Because on your death, if you own nothing except maybe your household goods and effects and a few personal items, like maybe some jewelry that you are particularly fond of, special types of shoes that you know that are quite expensive or what have you, it's not, maybe the entire sum of that is not going to be enough to qualify for your estate to be registered qua master, because it won't satisfy that $10,000 threshold. It's property that is sentimental, of sentimental value to you, certain cups and dinner plates and things like that. In those particular instances, I advise people write a will, and in that will you're just simply apportioning kuti you can have my precious teacups and that person can have my phone and so on. But that estate, if it is below that threshold, it will not be registered qua master, and your relatives can just give out the property, you know,
which is
quietly
what happens
and
in most
efficiently.
cases, right? Which is what happens in most cases. Munapiwa kapu imechete munapiwa preti kapu whatever.
Yeah.
Because I see what you mean.
Yeah. But if you have valuable assets, and anything that is immovable is a valuable asset because it is appreciating with time. So your land and buildings, it's very important. Kuti, those now, put them in a trust. Because when you die, these things just remain in the trust. The trust continues regardless of whether Rose has died or not. It's just continuing and doing its business. And apana anoenda kwa master to register anything, because apana chiri muzita mani maRose Zigomo.
Rose. Saka, are you suggesting that what we should all do is go to see our lawyers and say, can you form a trust for me to put all my worldly things imomo kuitira whenever you pass on, so that there won't be any of these things coming in vanhu vashaya zvekuita 10 15 years 20 years munhu afa, because they have no money, and apparent and also a lot of times not having enough knowledge kuti where do we start off nyaya kana munhu asina will asina chii but ane maproperties.
Yeah. So it's important. Go and see your lawyer. There are good lawyers out there that are trained in estate planning, and they've got the experience, and they also have an idea or a knowledge of tax, and they'll be able to structure now something for you. So in that, setting up a trust, setting up my companies, what they're doing is putting together a structure for you that is going to help you and your beneficiaries to avoid aya makosa ndakandichitaurai.
Nairos, vanhu vanozviziva here zvinhu zvauri kutitaurira izvo? Vanhu vazhinji vanozviziva here?
I think there's not much knowledge on this. Vanhu vanozopepuka kwa master on the death of a loved one, because the master's office, the personnel are very, very efficient and very knowledgeable. Saka when they have my edict meetings and then to appoint an executor, the ningirikini, the assistant master ningari mu court, anoto tanga atomboita a little speech where they talk about these costs, my estate costs. Kuti funge munhu zvaashaya kudaro, usafunge kuti wakutongoenda unotora zvinhu zvake, aiwa. Pane macosts achada kuti abhadharwe. So people are always shocked when they hear, 4%, what's going on? We thought kuti
avamboziva kuti 4% of how much. Vanenge vachiti ane masitoro, ane dzimba, ane imba kuGlenlond, ane imwe iri kuGreston Park. That sounds very good. but then when that is quantified now in maakutaurwa kuti pakudiwa 4% and those things are there, but 4% inopano kubva kwamuri imimi. Pane nyaya.
Ipapo, then people are like, oh no, this is not good. Oh no, what can we do? But now it's too late now. But what I do advise those relatives, if I'm the executor, I'll say to them, okay, now you're going to inherit all these things. Pachine, another step that you have to go through, which is going to be transferring these properties from the deceased person into your own names. Pane makos achayuya futhi ipapo. And you want to what? Reduce those costs. And what are those costs? It's going to be the cost of transferring the assets into the names of the beneficiaries. So that cost, iyoyo pane futhi ka 3% kari kuenda kuna lawyer, kami ka 3% kari kuenda kuna government. Pane, there might even be CGT, but capital gains tax, but normally waiver, government waives capital gains tax for that transfer of property because they say, Munuyu has died, so we don't want to, it's not like they're selling the property. So let's waive this. But that lawyer's fee, that conveyancing fee, 3%, stamp duty 3%. So what I advise people is, imimi wacho vari kuinherita. Chitai isai property zvamucha inherita imimi, form a trust and put it in the trust, so that you are not going to.
Is that before munhu wacho afa here?
Aiwa atofa. Now
you can still
taakuda kubatsira ava who are now inheriting property yemufi, so that they won't go through their relatives won't go through the same thing. So what we just say to them, so what we say to them is, okay, now you're in the position of an heir, mudyiwe naka, saka iwe ochitanga kufunga manje kuti, what is going to happen to my children when I die? Da receive zvinizvi. Because you know what happens? It's a cycle. The father dies, you go through that process yekwa master, muchibhadhara mafizi esewayo, mozotambira zvinhu zviya. Mother dies, you go through again the same process. More, so you know, it's just it's a pain. So if it's if let's say it's the first spouse, I normally say to the second spouse, do a trust so that your children don't have to come through this process again on your death. So let's put things in a trust, and let's make sure that people don't have to come back to the master's office and go through this. And then the other aspect of having set up a trust, which people think, oh no, I've set up a trust, oh no, now everything is fine. You still need to transfer the properties into the trust. So that the actual title deeds need to change the name.
Oh, really?
Because, I mean, I had an uncle who, on the death of his first wife, he immediately did a trust, and he put the house, the property that they owned, into that trust. But he kept delaying and delaying and delaying to transfer the names on the title deeds to the trust. And then he died a few years later, and
asata transfer.
And those properties that were supposedly in the trust now also were levied these death duties. The masters,
because are complete.
So it's a cycle that needs to be completed, and people think, oh, I've set up a company, or I've set up a trust. No, you still need to transfer that property into the
actual
transfer.
Imba yangu inini yakanzispiwe mapfumo. Kana ndaitransfer kuenda mutrust aichanzi title deed aichatiswe mapfumo ya muzita retrust yacho.
Exactly. That's exactly what you want to do. So that on your death apasina munhu ari kutarisa achiti, oh, spiwe, but pane properties aiwa, but anga anyora will, kana anga anyora nigirikini trust. No. Kana anga asati apedza the circle, ichangonzi property yes.
How long does it take? Because kana wanyore waisa trust ka, how long does it take to transfer? Because I would like to think your lawyer should advise you kuti now waita trust ka, transfer these things immediately, material deeds, ema dzako nema properties ako into into
Yeah.
the trust, right?
Yes, the lawyer will automatically tell them to do that. But a lot of clients will
I
say,
know. I'll
oh,
do
no, I
it.
don't have the money. I don't have the money now. But what you want to do is to get into structure a deal with your lawyer where you say, okay, tiri kukotana iyi mari yekuita transfer these assets. Can I pay in installments? And at least
How
matangisa the process. Right.
Say we have a house here, it worth is $500,000, and you want to transfer the deeds that you quit and pay some trust. How much? Just give us a round, whatever, because
So, so, so the conveyancing fee will be 3%.
of the with the Maria
Yeah,
property actually.
yeah. But you can agree with your lawyer because you're not saying, look, I'm wanting to sell this property. I'm trying to do estate planning. So I'm not going to go and take the market value. I'm going to take
Yes,
a reasonable value.
that's
And you can
right.
agree with your lawyer on that without the lawyer necessarily falling foul of the law, because the lawyer is permitted to make certain adjustments to the statute, but not a lot. So it would be called undercutting if a lawyer then says the
Yeah.
property is actually worth 300,000, but they're going to do it for 50,000.
Okay.
The lawyer would be contravening the law if they did that. So there must be a reasonable place where you can
It's
get to.
legally contravening the law, but it's
Yeah.
acceptable because it's between the two of you, right?
It's between the two of you, and it is in such a way, because remember, per conveyancing fee, pane stamp duty. Saka, you don't want to be doing the government down on the money that is due to them for the
Okay.
transfer of title. So
Okay.
that's why I said that the value must be reasonable. It doesn't have to be the exact market value, but it must be a reasonable value,
Okay.
so that the government is not cheated out of their stamp duty. So, but in
Because
any event, if it is a donation, sorry, Auntie Spear, I just want to make this last
that's
point.
okay.
If it is
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. Wind up.
donation, the government can actually say we'll waive that stamp duty. So the
What do you mean a
only
donation?
if
If
let's
I'm
say when you do a deed of trust, you then donate a property into the trust. The government says, oh, it's a donation. Nobody has made money from this. They've just simply transferred property from this person to that legal person. So it's a donation. So we're not going to invoke
but
a
kana
tax.
yazoenda mutrust macho imomo and
Mm-hmm.
ndakuda kuti chido changu muwiro mangu ndichida kuti I want to will that house to three people, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
How does that work? Can they sell the house iri mutrust imomo so that they can get I bequeath it kune Rose, my friend,
Mm-hmm.
Maria, my friend, and Janet, my cousin. And how does that work out? Can I some trust imomo, but I want to bequeath it to other people?
Oh, that doesn't work now. So that you have to be, it's a very good question, because these are some of the advantages and the disadvantages of setting up a vehicle. Once you set up a vehicle, you have given up some control over that article, that item, that asset. So once you say, I've set up a trust and I have donated an asset into that trust, you're basically saying that I no longer have the free will to just willy-nilly donate it to whoever I want, bequeath it to whoever. No, I've set up a vehicle. In that vehicle, I've said I've donated my house to this vehicle. And the people that run the trust, the board of trustees, are now the people that make the decisions related to that house. So I
Okay.
cannot then come back and say, oh, no, no, I'm bequeathing that. No, because
Co,
that
co,
house no longer belongs to you.
okay. I see, I
So,
see the advantage, but I do also see
yeah.
kuti kana waisa mutrust imomoka, why donate there, then you gonna kuita anything about it. But if I want to, like you said, I can negotiate with my lawyer to move my title deeds and kwaisa mu will trust imomo. I can still appoint, I can still bequeath it to somebody, can I?
No, you can't. once a property goes into a trust, as in you've done the process of transferring it so that the title deeds now are written Kachidza Mapfumo Trust, no longer Spiwe Kachidza Mapfumo.
So what's going to
Once
happen
the
with
title
that
deeds have
property?
changed, so now it's the board of trustees that makes decisions with respect to that property. And the board of trustees are the people that you would have thought very seriously when you created this vehicle, are people that you can work with. So you are gonna be one of those trustees, and you're gonna maybe appoint 2 others. Normally, a trust will have a minimum of 2 trustees and a maximum of 8. You don't want a big board of people making decisions concerning stuff that you've worked hard to acquire. So you want really a situation where you've picked a couple of people that you trust and know very well, and you know, Kuti, my decisions that you're going to be making, you're not going to be facing like people constantly opposing
Challenging
you,
you, yeah.
challenging you, and so on. So there has to always be that fine line between the independence of a trustee and the will of the will and the power of the person who set up the trust. So it's a fine line. Yeah. So with the people that you would have appointed to run the trust, you can agree, Mess Equity, okay, maybe you hadn't made that decision. The beneficiaries are going to be my son, my daughter, and the grandchildren. So those people are the ones that this house that is in the trust are being managed for. This house is being managed for the benefit of these people.
But it's not going to be sold at any time. It just will be.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that
just
what we're
kept
saying?
for that. Yeah, and the trustees must keep that property well. They must handle that property well. They can't just allow bills to
Skyrocket and
to skyrocket, and and then now it's being auctioned or what have you. They must make sure that the beneficiaries are able to enjoy that asset. The other thing I wanted to say, in terms of your estate planning, if you don't do a trust or set up a company, is you can actually I've seen people doing this, donate assets whilst they're still alive to certain people. So maybe as Rose Zigomo, I have got 5 properties, and then I have 2 children. And I'm saying, whether I live to 80, 100, or I die at 51, I want these properties, those 5, God divide between my children. Otora 2, uyotora 2. 1 yopinda into both their names. Dotoitachi a deed of donation. Dolapa vana ivavo. And it's those specific properties, so that on my death, these properties are no longer in my name. The children know that they are theirs. Maybe they were allowing me to use them and so on whilst I was still alive.
But a problem here because mwana wacho anobva decided, you know
Oh.
what, I want to sell it now.
Yeah, you can.
And
that's
where with
another.
the idea, yeah, that's an well. On that
thing.
point, I think that will be our next Nikanini with you. We might want to continue and vakatitaurira kuti tinoda kuti Rose Zigomo auye kuzotitaurira more about nyaya yema estate ka. This is very interesting, and I personally have learned quite a few things from conversation yataita zuva ranhasi. Aiwa vanhu mamuona ka Rose uyu tinomutenda auya kuzotitaurira nekuti zvinofamba sei pakuti nyaya dzemaproperties dzinonetsa and kusaziva kunenge kwakatoipa chaizvo, and kuzivawo kuti kune chinhu chinonzi matrust, nekuti kune manhikekenineaya mamasters fee anozobhadharwa, maestates rates anozobhadharwa aya, maduty anotaurwa aya, mari dzamataura dzakawanda fani, and kuti ungotora mari kuti ainga takasiyirwa zvinhu zvacho tiri kubhadharirei mari iyi hatizvizivi. Asi kana tichidaidza magweta anenge imimi wachiva chititaurira kuti aiwa zvinofamba zvakadai kuavoida maproblems akadai munogona kuita. There are ways of going around these things, legal ways of going around these things, and a lot of times we fall into these problems because of lack of knowledge. We perish without knowledge, Saka aiwa, Rose tinokutenda nhasi wauya pano pakanoiwa nyai, tinokutenga sangwadzi on behalf of shamwari dzedu dziri kutiteerera, dzinotiteera pano pachirongwa chedu chekanoiwa nyai. Tinokutenda muzukuru nekuti wauya kuzotitaurira. Zvinofanza fani kuti we saw you growing up, magweta makutotidzidzisawo kuti munofanira kuita zvakadai. That is exactly why we send you young people to school, so that muzotibatsira kutivhura maziso kuti tione. Handitika aiwa, tirokutendai. Tokutendai vateereri vangu vachititeera, vari kuZimbabwe muchienda koja, vari nokuCanada aiwa bamushushura zvakanaka, moswera zvakanaka. Tokuonai mangwana. Tinenge tina Messi Nyakwende Mavhiko ari kuuya kuzotitaurira nenyaya yeloss and grief during COVID. Inyaya yakakomba chaizvo yekuti tinofanira kuziva kuti tonyaradzana sei kana tasangana nezvinhu zvakaomarara zvatakaona muCOVID imomo. Aiwa, she's a clinical social worker and anodhila nezvetrauma. Ane kampani yake kuno kuCalgary anoita izvozvo, anobva kwedu kwamutoko. Saka ari kuuya kuzotinyepa mangwana. Same time iyo iyi pakanoiwa nyai tinenge tina Messi Mavhiko anenge achititaura about loss and grief, kufirwa nekushungurudzika munguva ino dzeCOVID. Saka ndokuonai mangwana, inini wenyu Sangwa Dzisipiwe Kachidza Mapfumo. Moswera zvakanaka, morara zvakanaka.